What's up, coaches? Aaron Wilbur, founder of the Coaches Site. Welcome to the Glass Note podcast. Today, we're going to be going back in the TCS vault and revisiting a conversation I had at last year's College Hockey Inc. Virtual Coaches Clinic with legendary coaches Red Berenson of the University of Michigan and Jack Parker of Boston University. I think there's so much that you're going to take away from this conversation. Of course, if you want to check out all the presentations from the College Hockey Inc. Virtual Coaches Clinic, along with all the presentations and content on the Coaches Site, you need a membership. So if you don't have one, use the coupon code GLASS and OUT. You're going to save 25% off the first year of an annual membership. And again, if you love coaching, I can guarantee you're going to love being a member of the Coaches Site. And with that, on to my conversation with Red Berenson of the University of Michigan and Jack Parker from Boston University. I don't normally get starstruck, so to speak, but I am genuinely geeked up, a little nervous, and very grateful to get to speak to the two gentlemen who are about to join me. And of course, I'm referring to Red Berenson and Jack Parker, two legends of not only the college game, but in hockey, period. And I'll tell you what, if you were to measure coaching success by the amount of people you had a positive influence on, or who later in life became friends and continue to reach out for guidance, then Red and Jack are Hall of Famers. And in every way that you can define success, they are Hall of Famers. Their respective lists of accomplishments and achievements are far too long to list here. So for the sake of time, I'll do my best to summarize before they join us. Red Berenson was the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines, his alma mater, for 33 seasons from 1984 to 2017. He would lead the Maize and Blue to 11 Frozen Four appearances and national championships in 1996 and 1998. Also, he has the distinction of being inducted into both the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame and the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame. Jack Parker spent 47 seasons, 47, on the Boston University campus as either a player or a coach, and 40 behind the Terriers bench. During his tenure, BU captured 3 national championships, 21 Beanpot titles, and broke the record for most Frozen Four appearances with 13. On 3 occasions, he was the recipient of the Spencer Penrose Award as the top coach in college hockey, and in 2014 received the Hobey Baker Legend of College Hockey Award. It is my honor to welcome Red Berenson and Jack Parker to the College Hockey Inc. Virtual Coaches Clinic. Red and Jack, thanks so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
Yep, me too.
So I thought we could start in the lead up to this conversation. I had touched base with both of you, and each of you had mentioned that you had recently been on a bit of a nautical adventure in the summertime. I'm wondering if maybe we could start there. Can you share a little bit about what your summer looked like and perhaps any other highlights from retirement so far?
I'll start then. I do a lot of sailing in the summertime and play a lot of tennis. And part of the sailing ritual is to take a 2-week cruise up the coast of Maine on the boat with my wife and a couple other people in their boats. And we had a pretty good cruise this year. No fog, which was nice, and but it was visiting the usual places we go in Penobscot Bay and points east from there. So it was a lot of fun. Other than that, I do a lot of day sailing. I don't race the boat anymore, but do a lot of day sailing and play a lot of tennis and hang around with my grandchildren.
Red?
Yeah, we don't sail, but we typically go on a summer canoe trip in June, usually in late May, early June, up into Canada. And obviously the border was closed this year, so all bets were off. We went out on the Missouri River a couple of years ago when we couldn't get into Canada, and that was a good experience, but it was a long way to go. And they told us the water coming straight out of the mountains was unboilable. So we went the furthest we could for clean water, and we got the dirtiest water that we've ever had on a canoe trip. But I still go on canoe trips, and sometimes we'll take our former players that will go again, or they've never been. I mean, it's been a good experience. It's been fun. And this year I had a player call me from Newfoundland, and Michigan guys will know his name, but anyway, he called me. He's a lawyer now. He said, I need to go on another canoe trip. And I said, I'll put your name at the top of the list, Kent, and we'll see what happens. Well, it didn't happen. The border just opened here a few weeks ago, and we got across the border. We took our trailer and visited family out in Western Canada. So it was good. It was better than just sticking around. Like, we had to get out and go somewhere. Jack's got that big ocean right outside his back door, but we don't. And we had to drive a long way, but it was worth it.
Excellent. You know, it's interesting. Troy Ward, former collegiate coach at Wisconsin, and does some work with us now here at the coaches site. But he's always said that to be a coach long term, that in the off season you need to be near a body of water. That it's the only way to kind of bring it down enough to get back to the coaching grind, at least for the long term. You know, just looking back at the duration of both of your careers. Were there any hobbies or activities that you had to perhaps, you know, get away from the coaching grind and ensure that you were fresh when you came back to the rink? Red?
Well, canoeing, those canoe trips, after about the third day, you forgot who you were. You forgot about your family, your job, your players, all your issues. And by the end of the trip, you couldn't wait to get back and get back at it. So I think you need to get away. And I did that every year for 50 years.
Jack?
I had excuse me. I didn't do that right off the bat. I wasn't making that much money, so I was constantly working hockey schools in the summertime. And really, we were on the ice, you know, standing on the skates for quite a while during those days. But it was a lot of fun because you had other coaches that you competed against that were in the school with you, and their families were there. It was a real social time. So although we were still around the hockey game, teaching it, it was not quite the same, obviously, and it was much more of a social time. As after a while, I realized that I needed to really get away from that too, and BU started paying me a little bit more money, so I could afford to not go to hockey schools. And that's when I hired Ben Smith, and he was the one that got me into sailing, and that gave me a lot more to do in the summertime.
So I did my best to go back and look at the historical record between the University of Michigan and Boston University. The season by season records didn't go back past 1997. However, it was suggested that over the course of time, the two programs have played each other 29 times with an edge to Michigan, 15 wins to Boston University's 14. So remarkably close. Just looking back, any games against each other that stand out? I know there was a couple in the tournament, for example, that there would have been a lot on the line, and just maybe in general, just you know, any admiration for the other's program. Jack?
Well, I always had admiration for the Wolverines and how good they were year in and year out. When I was playing college hockey, we played them a few times, and you know, Mel Wakabayashi was around, and they had some very, very good teams. And then we played them right off the bat in national tournaments in the 70s. But we never really had a consistent, you know, season to season schedule with them. So it was only we would meet in tournaments for the most part. We had an interlocking schedule with the WCHA, but Michigan wasn't in the WCHA at that time. So our schedules were pretty well filled with Hockey East and WCHA stuff at the beginning. But I do recall a few games. I remember I think it was 90, we had I thought we had a very, very good team. And we were going along pretty well. We just come off some big wins against Michigan State and BC. And we went out to Yost Arena. It was the first time I'd ever been there to coach at Yost Arena. And we got hammered both games pretty good. I mean, we not only got beat on the score, we were overwhelmed by the speed of the game, and so it really shook us up. And then about 2 weeks later, we went out and did the same thing, lost 2 to Denver, and it was kind of a wake up call for us. Well, I guess we're not as good as we think we are, and it kind of straightened us out because we went on to get to the semifinals of the national tournament that year. But I do remember thinking that we're in a different league when we're playing out here. And we played a couple of times in the national tournaments. One time we lost, excuse me, in the semifinals in Cincinnati, and then the next year we won in the semifinals in
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, that's right. Yeah. So those are two games back to back that we played. We both had really, really good teams in those 2 years. And I remember one time we played in a quarterfinal at BU, and I couldn't coach the first game because I was being disciplined by the NCAA for an incident against Michigan State in the Nationals the year before, and we won that game 4-1. And then I coached the second game. Tuke Cahoon was the head coach that night. He was my assistant, and he coached. And then we won the next game 8-1. And I told Tuke I was twice as good as he was. But it seems that whenever we played Michigan, at Michigan, we got hammered, and we did pretty well when we played Michigan at BU.
Red, how about yourself?
Well, I remember in '95 in the Final Four, and we played Maine, and I think we went into the fourth overtime. And of course, BU was sitting there waiting to play the winner for the national championship. So we, in a way, and Maine won the game in that overtime, but whoever was moving on wasn't going to have much left in terms of their legs. And so Jack won that. But in '96, as he mentioned, the Frozen Four was in Cincinnati, and they had an ice problem in the rink. The kid that was chopping the holes for the posts with the drill drilled into one of the Freon pipes.
No way.
And so there was a big discussion as to whether or not we would play the game. And so the coaches met and the rink people met, and we agreed to try the warm up. And if it was okay, we'd play the game. Well, in the meantime, there was a huge delay. And our trainer was running all over the rink looking for anything for our players to eat. You know, they hadn't eaten since whatever time. It was probably 8 hours ago. And so when the game started, and I remember telling Billy Powers, our assistant coach, one of these two teams is not going to be ready for this game. And we just don't want to be that team. And somehow we weren't that team. I mean, Jack will remember it was a clinic for Michigan in the first period, and the game was pretty much over. Well, the next year we got to Milwaukee, and we were the team to beat in '97, the best team I ever had at Michigan. And of course, in the banquet the night before, Jack, you know, with his, he said, it's Michigan's tournament to lose. And I knew, and our players had eat that up. And sure enough, no matter what we said or did, our team was not ready for that battle. And BU was all over us. It was a physical nightmare. And no matter how big you were going down. And it was, I don't know if Jackie would call it one of his most physical teams or games, but it took the championship right out of Michigan's hands that he so graciously offered to give us the night before. He remembers that.
I remember the game. I remember both games. I remember the game in Cincinnati. The game was over in the first 6 minutes, I think. There was power plays going on, and the Michigan power play was like, it was like we weren't even on the ice. They just passed it wherever they wanted to and scored, and passed it wherever they wanted to and scored. And they almost did the same thing every time, and we couldn't stop them. The next year was more of a, we were the heavy underdogs, and we just went out and played. I remember we put in a certain forecheck just for that game so we could be real physical, and we just wanted to see if we can get in their faces, and we got great goaltending that night too.
That's I love the gamesmanship. It's interesting if somebody wanted to be an accountant, it would be really clear the steps that they would have to take to get into that type of profession. I think what's interesting about coaching is it seems that every coach kind of has their own path to landing behind the bench. And I think, both of you are great examples. I think, Jack, I read that you were sort of thrust into the head coaching job at BU in the early 70s. And I know, Red, you had a different path coming from the NHL. Can you maybe just touch on your first introduction to coaching and maybe if you're able to pinpoint that time when you kind of officially got the coaching bug and the mindset was, hey, this is going to be my the career path I'm going to go down? Jack, starting with you.
I can remember, like it was yesterday. I was I was a finance major in the business school at BU, and I went into the banking business right after graduation. And that summer, my good friend and line mate, Billy Riley, who was a phys ed major at BU and was getting into coaching and teaching at his high school, where he went, Medford High School. He was going to be an assistant coach to a guy named George Boudreau, who played at Providence College, a real nice guy, Gigi Boudreau. And George wanted the BU guy to be his assistant. He wanted to put Jack Kelly's system into the Medford High program. And so we hired Billy. And in July, Billy called me up and he said, I got a big problem. I said, I'm supposed to be coaching with George and I'm leaving. I'm going to go down to Lehigh. They want me to, I'm going to start there. They had a club program down there and they want me to be a club coach for a while and then turn it into a varsity team. Can you do me a favor and take over my part-time job as the assistant hockey coach at Medford? And I said, geez, I can't do that. You know, I go to work every day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't get out till 4:30, 5 o'clock. So about 2 days later, I called them back. I said, I've solved that problem. I took an insurance adjuster's job instead, which gave me plenty of time to go when I wanted to go. And I was the assistant coach at Medford High. That was the year after I graduated. That was 68, 69 season. And then I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the players. I loved the competition. I loved the tactical aspects of it. And the very next year, Jack Kelly asked me to be his assistant coach with the varsity. Part-time assistant, go to graduate school. And in that whole time, I thought, this is going to be great. I'll go to graduate school, get a master's degree, and I'll become a high school teacher coach. And that's what I wanted to do. But as it turns out, I wound up staying at BU.
You sure did.
Jack, I have a question for Jack.
Go.
Jack, do you miss coaching?
I miss about 3 things about it, Red, and I'm glad to get rid of the other 30. I really miss the relationship with the players. I think it kept me young. I think coaching, being around younger people keeps you young. I miss the competition, and I still to this day think I miss the friendly competition with all the coaches that you and I coached against. We were blessed to be hanging around with a lot of great guys that we coached against. So that type of stuff I miss. But well, I was talking to Billy O'Flaherty the other day, and we were talking about the transfer portal. You know, I said, geez, you know, this is unbelievable. I said, you know, imagine you raise a voice to the kid and he'd be gone. Blappa said to me, Jack, you wouldn't have anybody in your dressing room. So I don't miss any of that stuff, but I certainly miss the relationship with the players and the competition and especially the camaraderie amongst the coaches.
How about you, Red? Do you miss it?
No, I don't. Actually, I'm still a big hockey fan. I watch NHL hockey every night, and I know most of the players that have come out of college hockey, and so I keep an eye on them. But and I know most of the coaches, so it's still, you know, I still think I'm a fan. And then I go to college games. I go to all the home Michigan games. I work for the Big Ten Hockey Conference and a little bit for Michigan as well. So I'm still into college hockey. I'm still in the rinks, and so I'm around it. And it's been really good for me. You know, we have 8 grandkids, and I'm still pretty active away from the building. So life is good. But I don't go home worrying about the power play. You know, I met Don Cherry once, and after he'd been fired, and we were in an airport, and I was coaching St. Louis, and he just got fired from coaching Colorado. And I said, Grapes, how's life without coaching? Now, I don't know if I should say this. He said, well, I had relations with my wife Rose last night, and I wasn't worried about the power play. I thought that was a classic statement, only from Cherry.
No kidding. Well, you know, and maybe on that note, Red, you mentioned you're still watching a lot of hockey. I'd be curious, you know, when you watch the game today, specifically the collegiate game, anything from a tactical perspective or just kind of an overall view of how the game has evolved since you first got involved from a coaching level?
Well, I've always liked the speed of the game. We always tried to have the players that could skate and control the puck and create offense. I think every good young player wants to be an offensive player of some kind, whether you're a defenseman or a forward. But nevertheless, I just think they've taken it to another level now. These offensive zone plays that you see in defensemen jumping up in the rush over and over again. It's high risk hockey, but it's well done. And there's so many more good players on the ice. It was not that long ago where you only had to worry about maybe one line on the opponent's team or two. Now it might be 3 or 4 lines. And certainly it's similar in the NHL where you've got a lot of guys that can score. And look at the success Tampa Bay's had with their third line, so-called third line, and so on and so forth. And, the one thing that hasn't changed is the unexpected heroics of teams that weren't supposed to be good. And somehow they found a way. Look at Montreal last year and so on. You see it in the pros and you see it in college. So it's still good. You have to play the games to find out who's on top.
Jack?
I don't watch as much pro hockey during the regular season. I often wonder what season ticket holders think when they watch the regular season and then they see the playoffs.
Great point.
To me, that it's the biggest differential in sports, the NHL regular season intensity and style compared to what's going to go on come playoff time. So I watch my guys that played for me, my guys that are coaching. I watch their teams, but I'm not really into watching pro hockey during the regular season. I don't miss a game. I'm staying up watching West Coast games at night in the playoffs, because it's so exciting and it's so intense. And Red did it. I never did it. It amazes me that they play every other night at that intensity.
Okay.
Beyond belief how hard they play and how intense it is. But I do watch college hockey. I watch BU a lot of home games, and I'll even travel to some away games if it's around a place I can go skiing maybe or something, But I'm amazed at how college hockey has changed. One of the things that has changed is the age of the players. There's a lot of 24-year-olds now playing, 25-year-olds, some even. Players are staying out of college and coming in at 20 and 21-year-old. And the other aspect of it is there's so many players. Red and I both coach great players, and I'm sure it was the same with Red. The great players that I had that went on to be great pros, when they were at BU, they were at BU. They were all in. They didn't have one leg out the door. Nowadays, it appears that some of the kids that show up in college hockey are showing up to check off the box. I played in Yost Arena, or I played in a Beanpot. Now it's on to the next better thing. There's so many college hockey players that are in the pro ranks now, and there's nothing wrong with aspiring to be. I think it's great to aspire to be a pro hockey player, but I think it's a little bit more difficult to keep them home. Keep them there for a couple of years than it was when I was coaching.
This episode is brought to you by Instat Hockey, a company that makes sure no action on the ice slips your radar. Passes, puck battles, dekes, dump-ins, dump-outs, zone entries, and exits, everything. All data is registered, neatly arranged, and visualized to help coaches know their players like the back of their hands. You can access virtually any team, any player in any league. If you're not using Instat, you're coaching shorthanded. See what you need to see, cut it down, break it down, and make your players aware of what they're doing to ultimately improve them. Instat Hockey is your pillar of stronger communication with your team. Visit instatsport.com/hockey to learn more about instant post-game reports and Instat Scout, the unparalleled video analytics platform. Again, visit instatsport.com/hockey to learn more. Sure. And that's maybe an interesting segue because, we hear all this talk about millennials today and how coaches have to adapt and change to accommodate the player. And I'm always mindful that sometimes we have to pause and say, we've sort of created this a little bit where we have a hockey system now where there's websites where they rank who the top 10-year-olds are. And, if you're a good hockey player growing up, I mean, it's just been reinforced to you that you maybe you are on a pedestal. And so by the time they do get to the collegiate game, it's fair to say that you do get a different athlete than you may have 20 years ago. So as you progress through your career, did you find yourself having to adjust to connect with players, or was it a situation where you had your standards within your program and the players had to come in and adapt to that? Red?
A little bit of both. I think, for example, we had a high-end player and it was a top 5 draft pick, and they couldn't wait to come to school, and they were so proud. Their parents had tears in their eyes and so on. And one of the parents said, I'll promise you one thing, our son will stay for 4 years. Well, after 1 year, there was already a knock on the door, but I think he lasted 2 years. And so even the parents, they don't know. And the pros don't always know. Now, I always ask them, look, if you're ready to play in the NHL, I'll drive you to the airport. Like, I don't want to stop you from living your dream. But on the other hand, I'll be pretty disappointed if you play the next few years in the minors when you could be playing at Michigan, developing and getting your education. That's what you came for. So everyone's on a different track, and some guys can make that step right into the NHL, and some guys can't. And it's but the pros will, they'll paint a pretty picture for you, and then you wait and find out. They say, oh yeah, you're in our top 3 centermen, and by the time you get there, you're number 7 as a centerman, and you're playing in the minors. So it is what it is. This year's draft was maybe an anomaly with players from one school getting 4 of the top picks in the top 5. That was amazing to see. And they've all come back to school, which for the time being anyway. So good for them. And it was good last year in the playoffs when the Wisconsin kid who won the Hobey Baker shows up in Montreal, and not to a lot of fanfare, but by the end of the playoffs, he showed that he was as good as anybody when it came to scoring goals. So good for him.
Jack?
As far as the change of kids and attitude, people would always ask me, what's different now than when you first started coaching as opposed to the end of your career? And I always would say the kids are different. And I think that I'll give you a quick example. My good friend, and Red knows him very well too, Timmy Taylor, God rest his soul. Timmy was the coach of the 1979 National Senior All-Star game for the East. They used to have an All-Star game where only seniors could play because of NCAA rules. So he was coaching the team. It was out in Minnesota, the game. And Timmy told me the story that he walked in the dressing room just before the game, and everybody was roaring laughing in the dressing room when he walked in. It was an All-Star game. People aren't taking it real serious. But the minute he walked in, it was dead quiet. And Timmy said, what's so funny, guys? And nobody said a word. So he looked at Jack O'Callahan, who was my captain that year.
Yeah.
And O'Callahan was the captain of the All-Star team. So we looked at him. He says, hey, Captain Jack, you're not going to tell the coach what's so funny? And O'Callahan says, well, actually, your player, I forget who it was, but it was a Yale player that was on the team as well, just did a great impression of you, a great impersonation of you, and we got a kick out of it. And he said, really? He said, can you do an impression of your coach, Jack Parker? And O'Callahan said, I sure can. He says, well, let's see it. So Jack got up, walked out of the dressing room, then walked back in again, slammed the door behind him, looked at everybody and said, you guys suck. So that was I guess that's how my legacy with my early on players, I couldn't do that in the 90s and the 2000s. People would wilt. If you looked at a kid the wrong way sometimes, or raised your eyebrow a little too loudly, then he would be gone for the rest of the game. One thing that was always consistent that you could use in the 70s or the 2000s was ice time, but you had to be a little different approach to kids early on, and then than the way they are today. I think the way they were in my last 10 years of coaching, say. So I had to change my behavior, let's put it that way, and my approach to trying to get a point across to players.
Well, that evolution, I think, is so fascinating in our game. And I would say, like, even in the last 10 years, I think you can just look at the NHL level. I mean, you can see that shift in maybe how coaches carry themselves. Each of you so far have referenced a couple of players, notable players that have come through your program. And I know in doing research for this, I mean, the list for each of you of the players that have gone on to have success internationally in the National Hockey League, it's incredibly long. But, Red, you touch on the players that could make that jump directly from college to the pros or to the NHL. When you look back, is there or are there any common characteristics amongst those players, aside from their talent or skill set, but perhaps allowed those players to not only make that jump but then sustain it in the National Hockey League?
Well, I think the one thing that we all try and do as coaches is help our players develop and improve their skill level. And but I've always felt as a player, when I got to the NHL, you better learn how to check, or you're not going to be on the ice very much, especially with a good team. And so we try to pride ourselves on helping our players become good two-way players. So they know what to do when the team's got their back up against the wall in a tight game and whatever, and their coach is going to trust them. And I've always felt that was a good trait. But when you get a real good player, like we have Brendan Morrison, and Jack remembers Brendan was a great player at Michigan. And after his junior year, Lou Lamoriello, who had drafted him in Jersey, went out to try and sign him, and Brendan said to him, matter of fact, he called him coach. He said, "Coach, I'm not ready to play in New Jersey. Like, I'm not strong enough, I'm not fast enough, and I'm not a good enough two-way player yet." And he said, "Yet." And so anyway, Lou lamented the fact that Brendan didn't sign, and so Brendan came back and had a Hobie Baker year, his senior year, and had a terrific year. And that year, after his junior year, he had scored the winning goal in the national championship game, actually in Cincinnati. So he had a lot going for him. But so when he got to Jersey, the first thing they did was send him to the minors. And Lou called me and said, "Look, Morrison's okay, but he's still going to have to learn a few things." Well, he called me about a month later, and he says, "We can't keep Morrison in the minors. He just scored 5 goals tonight. He's too good for the American League." And I reminded Lou, I said, "Lou, you were a college guy. That's why Brendan came back for his senior year, to be ready for New Jersey Devils, not for the American League." And I guess that's what it's all about. Can you play the whole game, and can a coach trust you? And we're all surprised by players. We've had players that I thought were can't miss, and they couldn't play in the next level. And we've had players that nobody thought they could. They weren't even drafted, and yet they're making a career in the NHL just through hard work and character and being great teammates and leaders and so on. So there's so much more to it than scoring goals.
Jack?
I'd go on with the exact same stuff. The one characteristic that I would say always stood out with the guys that left BU and became established pros. I mean, we had when I was recruiting kids, I'd always tell them, "Don't come to BU because you think you're going to be an NHLer." Because we put a lot of guys in the NHL, but they're minute compared to most of the guys that played for us. The percentages are, for every Chris Drury, there's 7 guys that never made it. We have a whole bunch of guys that played pro hockey. I've got guys that have won Stanley Cups that didn't make their living playing pro hockey. They had to do something else. But the guys that did make their living, the guys that were the stars, and I agree with Red, some guys were, I can't believe this guy didn't make it, and I was surprised this guy did. But the guys that had real long careers, they all had talent, obviously. But the thing that always jumped out at me was the fact that when I reflect back, they had great pro careers. And when they played for me, they were unbelievably competitive. They had to beat that guy to the puck. They had to win that battle. They weren't just cruising around looking to get a goal. They were very, very, very competitive. And I think that's the thing that was the difference between the guy that had talent and didn't make it and the guy who had talent and did make it. Was it was almost like he had to make it because he was so competitive. I had guys just like Red described that left and that shouldn't have left, and had okay careers, but never as good, never made it to the NHL in a long period of time. I've had other guys that were going to sign and decided to come back, and Chris Drury is a great example of a guy who came back and won the Hobie Baker Award, and then the next year he was Rookie of the Year in the NHL. I don't think he would have been Rookie of the Year if he left at the end of his junior year. So I think that those type of examples. I remember Sean Bates was a junior, and the Bruins wanted to sign him, and they were very truthful to him. They go, "We want to sign you because we want you in the American Hockey League. We need players in Providence." I used to tell people, I know exactly when you should leave BU, when you're going to go play in the NHL. Don't leave here to go play in the minor leagues. And Sean took that advice and stayed for his senior year and had a great senior year, and then he went right to the Bruins. So I think that it's a hard choice sometimes, and people get, I think, mesmerized with the notoriety and the money, and this is what I always wanted to do, so it's time to go. But for the most part, our guys were pretty smart in making a decision. I had a player, Matt Gilroy, who fabulous junior year. He told me he was going to leave, and I thought he should have left, and I gave a scholarship away. And his parents came in to see me and told me they didn't want him to leave, and he can't give this up. And he came in here. I said, he's got to graduate. I said, "Oh, I've never had a guy leave at the end of their junior year who didn't graduate from BU. I know he'll graduate. That's fine." And I remember his mother said to me, "You don't understand. He came in with these freshmen. He should graduate with his teammates. He should be around them for all 4 years." And he came back and won the national championship and the Hobie Baker that year. So
that's right. So
it was, and he also was a free agent after that too, which gave him a better signing situation too. But so there were guys like that, and there were also guys that I thought. I remember Mike Greer, St. Louis wanted to sign him, and I said, "What do you?" He came in to see me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "I don't think you're ready." He was a sophomore at the time. "I don't think you're ready to go, Mike. I think you got some other things you got to improve upon here." So they told me that I was the most important guy in the organization, other than the 20 guys on the varsity roster on the NHL team. I was the most important guy they had, and they wanted to get me going. I said, "Well, that's what they're supposed to tell you, but I'm telling you, I think you ought to stick around." So we called the GM and coach at St. Louis and told them I decided to stay another year at BU. And the next year they traded him. The next day they traded him because, and I said, "Mike, what do you think, Mike? It's a business, you're the most important guy in the organization." And then they traded you. The next year he came to me at the end of his junior, and they traded him to Edmonton. He said, "Edmonton wants to sign me. What do you think?" I said, "You got to go. You're ready to go." "Well, why do you say that?" "You told me not." I said, "Well, because first of all, Edmonton has no idea how good you are. They won't even realize that you're going to be killing penalties for them. They think you're just a big power forward, but you'll be killing penalties for them. They have no idea how good you are. And secondly, you can't stay in our league anymore because every time you touch somebody, you get a penalty. So there's no sense in sticking around here anymore." But he went on to have a pretty good career. But I think he would have made a mistake if he went at the end of his sophomore year. Who knows? He might have made it anyways. But I think family. Brett already mentioned sometimes the families can chalk it in, but sometimes the parents are all enamored with it too, and they want to go more than the kid does. So it's hard to read. But I think that the idea of the guy that stood out to me all the time was the guy that was so competitive that he could not be an NHL.
Well, maybe on that note, when you looked at your team, so that's talking about the individual players, but when it came to your teams, were there any traits, perhaps from a technical perspective, that you looked for that were maybe your thumb on the pulse to let you know that that particular team had an opportunity to have success come playoff time? Jack?
I think the most important thing, if you look at the history of our program, if you look at the teams that were really, really successful, the best guy on the team, or the best few guys on the team, player-wise, were also the best guys on the team. They were good teammates. They were good leaders. They cared about the fourth line right wing. They cared about being ready for the next game and having their team ready. I would say when we had really good teams, we had great leadership from the really good players, and that trickled down to everybody else. The other thing that when I look back on the national championship teams or the '91, I had a couple of teams that didn't win it. Like Red said, his '97 team was one of the best teams ever, and they didn't win it. I had a couple of teams, the '91 team, the '76 team. They were great teams too. And the thing that always jumped out at me was we had unbelievable depth from top to bottom. And we had guys that were in '95. Chris Drury was the fourth line center.
Wow.
So I mean, we had unbelievable talented players, and on all four lines, or I think in 2009, all six defensemen wound up in the NHL, got a chance to play in the NHL. So depth was a huge factor in winning big games.
Red? Yeah, obviously a lot of what Jack said. I think the culture on a team is huge. With the right culture, just a slightly above average team can be a great team. And with the wrong culture, a great team would be a below average team, because that culture will catch up to them. And whether that's leadership in the locker room, whether it's jealousy, whether it's communication, it's hard to say, but because we're always surprised at how some teams do better than they're supposed to. And we're always surprised how some great teams don't do as well. And what are the reasons? I mean, that's why coaching is so important. I think coaching is even more important than it was 20 years ago. Kids were, like Jack said, kids have changed. They were more eager. They couldn't wait to get to practice and compete for a job and work their tail off and so on. And the coaches could get out of the way and just support them and identify them and figure out their lineups. But now you're babysitting them, and they're good players still, but it's not like they can't wait to get to the rink. And so they want to get to the rink under these conditions, that I've got the right role on the team, and that I'm on the power play, and I play with so-and-so, and I get so many minutes a game, and so on. We had one player we recruited. He was a high-end player, and he wanted to know who was going to determine his ice time, who's going to open the door at the bench. And he hadn't played a game yet, and so on. So anyway, you get a little bit of all those things, but you get strong leadership in the locker room. You get good coaching that sets a good example. And, the one thing I think a coach is, all of us have helped some kid along the way that we believed in, and that maybe no one else believed in them. And it was real. We put that kid on the ice and said, see what you can do. And he did it. And pretty soon everyone believed in him. Players that weren't drafted and weren't even recruited, and ended up walking on and playing in the NHL and so on. We had a great example of that in Luke Glendenning. And he just refuses to give up. He just works his tail off to do anything he can to help the team. He doesn't care if he scores or if he's on the power play. He'll do whatever it takes for the team to win. Block shots, win faceoffs, win races, win battles, and good for him. And that's the kind of guy that we should all want to be like. And then you can, if you've got the gifts of skills that might put you in the top six on the forwards on a team, then go for it. But there's not enough Luke Glendennings as far as I'm concerned. Jack would have loved him as a player.
Yeah, I've had a few like that myself, Red, and they're a pleasure to be around. And like I said, they care about others instead of themselves, and especially their teammates.
Yeah.
Red, you mentioned culture, and I would say it's almost rare that you would see a coach interviewed in 2021 where they don't somehow insert the word culture into their post-game talk, or, when they talk about their program. I wonder, was that the case? Was it such a buzzword when you first got into coaching, and then in general, was culture something you thought about or were mindful of as you built your program, or was it just something that you were aware of but maybe didn't have a specific word associated with it?
Yeah, I think the word attitude would have been very close to culture. When I got to Michigan, I thought all they needed was a coach. And I found out real quick that we needed a change in attitude. And that started in school, the attitude towards school, attending class or missing class, and so on. So, I mean, I felt a little bit like a game warden and a school principal for the first few years until we got the right mix of kids in there and kids that cared about the right things. And that took a while. So, we couldn't make trades, and I wouldn't cut a player unless he broke all the rules. But if he was just underachieving, we had to put up with him, and we honored his scholarship and so on. But it's not all easy for these college coaches. And now Jack mentioned that portal, a transfer portal. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be schools that don't even recruit anymore. They just recruit over the transfer portal. So that's a whole change in attitude. But back in the day, the culture, the leadership, when we had good leaders, when they walked in the room, I remember Jed Ortmeyer was a good example. Jed was just a hard-nosed, two-way player. And we wanted him to come in when he was a 19-year-old, finished high school, and played 2 years in the U.S. Hockey League. And Jed, it's time and he'd already committed to Michigan. And I said, I think you should come, Jed. He had so much respect for the college hockey in Michigan. And he says, Coach, I'm not ready yet. When I get there, I'll be more ready. And he did. He came in the next year and he added so much to our team and our program and became a 3-year captain, I believe. And now he works for the Rangers, actually. Works for Chris Drury as a development player. But anyway, that kind of guy, when Jed walked in the room went silent. And it wasn't because they were laughing at anybody. They just had so much respect, and they wanted to behave the right way for Ortmeyer, or he would let them know, before we go on the ice, boys, we're going to be this or we're going to be that. And when you get your players to stand up and lead like that, then you've got a great culture.
Well said, Jack.
I guess I agree with Red. There was terms like attitude or systems or I inherited a culture. Jack Kelly was the coach at BU for 10 years, put together a terrific program, won back-to-back national championships. I was the assistant coach for 1 year after Jack left as the freshman coach, actually, and then I became the head coach. So in my first year, I only had one senior on the team who was our captain, Eddie Walsh. He was an All-American goalie. Everybody else was bad. We had all kinds of real good players floating around, So for a number of years, I think that was a lesson that I learned too. I thought there was only one way to do it, and that was the way BU did it. I played with Jack. We've been very successful. I've been an assistant with Jack. We've been even more successful. I thought there was only one way to play a power play, one way to, and it was all about the team and either play this way, or if you don't want to play this way, you don't have to sit down. And but adversity teaches you some things, And I also learned along the way that one thing that a real bright person is somebody who learns from somebody else. And after a while, I realized that hey, there's a lot of other things going on in this league and in this level of college hockey that, and watching the pros as well, that you can incorporate into our team. But I don't ever remember using the word culture. I never, I remember thinking this is the way BU does it, but I don't remember using the word culture. But I know there was an expectation that you would conduct yourself a certain way. You would practice this way hard enough. I think the most important culture to me was how hard are we going to practice, and how good are we away from the rink as far as presenting ourselves around campus as a student and as a fellow classmate. don't think you're cooler than the rest of the people around here, please. And we, for the most part, you want to. I used to tell my assistants when we were recruiting kids, make sure you talk to the parents when you talk to them, because when you talk to the kid, he's going to, you're not going to get as good a feel. When you talk to mom and dad, especially dad, you get a feel, what type of kid we're getting. Because if the old man's a mook, then the kid's probably going to be a mook too, And we were lucky to have great parents that produce great kids. So I think that part of it was something we were always kind of keeping our eye open for. Let's make sure we have kids we're proud of, kids that we'd like to hang around with,
For sure. And Jack, you just mentioned early on in your career, just, that process of starting to look around and, as they say, coaches are the best thieves, or good coaches are the best thieves. Anything that you would look back on in your career and say, an example, I guess, of an area where you intentionally went out and said, I've got to improve in this area, or I have to learn how to help my team improve in this area, and maybe where you would have gone to gain that knowledge?
First of all, I gained a lot of knowledge from my assistants. They were good at getting me, stopping me, whatever had to be done. They were, so we would, I had great assistants, and I had a number of them that stayed a long time, they were 9 years or 12 years, whatever. And I was, one of my worst traits was the fact that I tried to control the game. Instead of coaching the guys on the bench, I was coaching the guys on the ice during the course of the game. Pass it, move it, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I could make people very, very jumpy, And my assistants would always, hey, you're doing it again. You got to back off here. And I would have to apologize to the team one more time. And but I think that kind of thing would always creep in on me from the time I first started to the last year I was coaching. I was always too controlling of my players on the ice, and I had to have help that way. I did take a lot from. There was a lot of great coaches that were innovative. I never dreamed up anything in my life. I never created anything. I never thought this would be a better way to do it. I saw somebody else do it. And I would say, wow, I thought Charlie Holt was a great innovator, and Charlie taught me a lot about the game just watching how he coached his teams. I thought
where was Charlie? Was he
Charlie was a long-time UNH coach?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Very successful coach there for a long time, and a great red nose. I mean, he's a fabulous guy, but he always had, he was going to Czechoslovakia to get systems and, coming up with new ideas. And they were difficult teams to coach against. I always had my problems with Sean Walsh for a number of reasons away from the game, with the way he recruited, the way he conducted himself in a lot of areas. But I always respected him as a coach, and I thought he made me a better coach because I constantly had to adjust to stuff he was doing. And I think that was true of a number of coaches, that not only would I like what they're doing, I'm going to do that. I would also have to say, geez, how can I stop them from doing that? To me, how am I going to stop them from doing that? I think that, you talked about stealing from other coaches. Like you say, I wasn't very creative, so I would steal from other coaches. But I also I would have to adjust to what they were doing. What are we going to do against this club? And we would have to come up with some ideas. But most of those ideas were from fellow coaches. And I know Red felt this way too. That one of the great things about college coaching when I was coaching was the people you were coaching against were great guys, and you could talk to anybody about anything. Hey, what do you think about this? And nobody was hiding things. I get a kick out of it. If you watch college basketball coaches, when the game is over, they shake hands like they hate each other. They don't even stop stride as they shake hands and go by each other. We would go out afterwards. We hang around together at the coaches conventions and hang. And I think that it was really good when we started to have more interleague play with the WCHA and the Central League. We got to know them, and that's how I got to know Red and other people in those leagues. you could learn an awful lot from people from just seeing how good. I wonder why they were that good this year. We used to always say, you want to have the best team. You want to win, get off the bus with the best team, which meant recruiting was so important. You had to get good players.
For sure.
Kids. But also there were systems involved that some people were doing that were difficult to get through center ice or difficult to stop their power play. And how are we going to do it? And you could learn an awful lot by observing the guy you're playing against.
Red, you touched on earlier just about, leadership in the dressing room and the importance in that and dealing with adversity. But I wonder, in terms of your role as a coach, I think sometimes, especially from a fan's perspective, we look at a championship team and we just assume that, oh, well, that team didn't have to deal with anything this year. They just were on cruise control. And I think that, we can all appreciate that even the best teams still hit bumps in the road, but they maybe they do a better job of managing it. When you encountered adversity with your teams, how did you go about leading your teams through it?
Well, I tried to do the right thing for our team and in some cases for the individual. Marty Turco won't want to hear this again, but we were fighting with Michigan State for first place one year, and we had a home and home series. And Marty was a senior, and he was having a great career. And I think he still got the record for most wins in the NCAA tournament. But nevertheless, he was our go-to guy. And but he had started missing classes, and I found out about it. I said, Marty, there's no more missing classes. This is your senior year. I want you to graduate, and I don't want you to set a bad example for your teammates, and so on. So I said, if you miss another class, you're going to miss the next game. And sure enough, he did, and sure enough, I did. So he missed the next game at Michigan State, and we got beat, and I went on TV, and then they said, well, how come Turco's not playing? And I said, because he missed a class. And I threatened him that if he misses another class, he's going to miss the next game. And I feel sorry for our fans and our players. We lost the game. We've lost first place. But it's the right thing to do. I mean, these kids have to learn, whether it's the easy way or the hard way. So anyway, that was an example. Now that team, I can say this, that team went on to win the national championship that year. That was a 98 team with 10 freshmen on it in Boston, actually, against BC, if you remember, in the championship game.
Yeah.
But and Turco was the star in the game, and good for him. And we were still friends after all this. But you have to make tough decisions along the way. And the team gets a message too. Then they realize, holy geez, if this can happen to Turco, it can happen to everybody or anybody, and so on. We've all had to do that. One thing I'd like to mention before, I don't know how long we're going to go today, but, one of the best things about coaching college has been, I've always preached about there's life after hockey. You don't know how long you're going to play. You might play college, you might play in the minors after that, and then you may end up having an NHL career. And but I want you to have a productive life, even a second or third career, if you can. And that's been one of the most rewarding things for me, is to see our players come back year after year, and who they are, who they've become, and what they are. It's amazing, and it's not just at Michigan; it's throughout college hockey. And so it's been really rewarding, because I one of the reasons I came to college hockey is I believed there's going to be life after hockey. There were only 6 teams when I turned pro. There was no money in it. I could make more money with a business school degree than I could minimum salary in the NHL at that time, 1962. And so it wasn't a long-term career to play in the NHL. You might play 10 years and you might play 1 year, but nevertheless. So I made up my mind. I'm going to school, and I'm going to, and that's the reason I'm going to coach. When I'm coaching in college, this is who I am. This is what we do, and it's not just about the money. It's about your self-esteem and your reputation and your citizenship as a person, and for your neighborhood, your town, and your country, and so on. And so I think, and the guys that Jack mentioned, all the great coaches out there, they care about hockey, and they care about X's and O's and so on, but they care about their players, and they don't want to see those players go the wrong direction. And they want them to change their life. And I think most of us that got to college, it changed our lives. And so whether it was Michigan or Wisconsin or Notre Dame or wherever they went, it was a life-changing experience. And who knows what would have happened to them if not. I went to a funeral the other day of who was a good friend of mine, Frank Legacki. He was a swimmer here at Michigan. He was from Philadelphia. And he had a family of 8, and they lived in a 3 bedrooms, I would call it very low income neighborhood in Philadelphia. And anyway, they weren't going anywhere. And one day he's walking down the street, and his 2 buddies were carrying towels. And he said, "Where are you guys going?" And they said, "We're going to try out for the high school swimming team." And he said, "Geez, I'd like to do that." And he ran back home and he got a towel. His life changed. He came to Michigan. He's been in Olympics. He's been a NCAA champion. Their team won the NCAA championship in 1961. They just celebrated that recently, and so on. So it's not just in hockey. College can change your life. So I'll let up on that, but I think it's worth reminding everyone. We do this for a lot of reasons.
You know what? I wanted to get to that, Red, and I think what's really interesting, and maybe perhaps you more than Jack can relate to this. So, as we touched on, I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, and when I talk to friends in the United States, not just in hockey, but just general sports fans, I always come away thinking, man, they don't maybe appreciate what being a student athlete in the NCAA is, because I think it's what they know, it's what they've grown up with. But certainly coming from Canada, that the pageantry, the energy when you walk on a campus is just, it's so foreign. I mean, I coached at the University of British Columbia, and we would go down and play exhibition games against NCAA teams, and our players, most of whom came from major junior, would walk onto the University of Minnesota and be like, "Oh my, like, what is this?" It's really to a different level. So, maybe Jack, just growing up and coaching in an area where college hockey, I sense, is so ingrained in the culture there. What is that college experience? What does that mean to you, especially, someone who would have grown up as a young boy, I'm sure, just, hoping that you'd have that opportunity to play, let alone go on and be a coach at your alma mater?
Well, one thing I agree with Red, the experience of going to college, being part of a team. I often wondered, when our guys would come in, they have friends automatically. They get goals that they're pushing for together. Some kid shows up from Tennessee to go to Boston University in the sprawling city of Boston, he thinks, and he's got to find his classes, and he doesn't have coaches helping him out and tutors helping him out and what have you. It's a lot different. But when you're a part of a team and participating in a sport representing your school, it's a completely different matter. And I think that the experience that a good example, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. Jeremy Roenick and Tony Amonte both played at the same prep school, Thayer Academy.
Yes.
They're both pretty good players, and they were being heavily recruited to go to college. And Tony decided to come to BU, and Jeremy decided to go to BC. And before Jeremy ever went to BC, he left and went to play a year in Ottawa. He went to play Major Junior A. And they both went on to have great NHL careers. Tony left at the end of his sophomore year, went right to the Rangers.
Yeah.
Jeremy was a big star, obviously, with Blackhawks for a long time. But I know to this day, because I know the players involved, Tony is very, very close with his teammates on the BU hockey team, because they went through those 2 years together. He's close with the Bavises. He's close with my son-in-law, Scott LeChance. He's close with Kachuk. He's close with guys that he went to school with. And I wonder if Jerry Moronic has as much contact when he's 60 years old with the guy he played with in junior A hockey. Because it's not quite the same experience. The experience in you're going to school, you're playing hockey, you're socializing, you're meeting a lot of different people on campus and growing an awful lot because of that. And I think that's something that should not be passed up. And it's something that I know when I went to college, I was from Somerville, Massachusetts, which I could have actually probably walked to BU if I wanted to. And I was a player at BU, and then I left for 1 year, and I was back as an assistant coach and then a head coach. So I've been around. We're celebrating this year. Boston University is celebrating 100 years of BU hockey. We've had hockey for 100 years, and I was involved in 48 of those 100 years as a player, as an assistant coach. So, my God, I had 3 squares a day in a hideout at BU for a long time. So, but it was, so I never left. But guys that left, they still come back. And I think one of the great things for me is that Red already mentioned it, is that I had such a great relationship with some of my best friends are my former players that I still hang around with and see today. And it seems like I lose track of who played with who. I think they all played in the same year.
Yeah.
Didn't Chris Drury play with Michael Rizzioni? No, they were 20 years apart. But I have that. I fell into a nice job, and it was great for me. But it never would have happened if I didn't go to college and play at Boston University.
Well, I thought we could close here, gentlemen. My biggest takeaway from this conversation, and I thought I came in pretty prepared, but as we've gone through the questions, I've just been jotting down. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, that player played there. Oh yeah, the Miracle on Ice team. Like Jack had 4 players on that roster that it's become so ingrained in our hockey culture, and it's remarkable the players that have come through your program. And I would think, you think of Chris Drury, who's now the president of the New York Rangers. When you look back at your former players and those relationships, Red, you mentioned that you had a former player, a lawyer now in the Maritimes, that called you up to go on a canoe trip. I would think that there's, those players that went on to play in the NHL. There's obviously a number of players that have assumed coaching or management roles in hockey today. And then, of course, you've got all those players that have they've gone on to have successful lives, and they're good citizens and good fathers and good husbands. Maybe in 2 parts, for those that have gone down the hockey path, when they call you up today, what's the most common advice that they're seeking, be it as a coach or a manager? And at the same token, in general, just those players that you've maintained relationships with, what's maybe when that phone rings late at night, what's maybe some of the advice or guidance that they might be seeking just in terms of life in general? And Red, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's more they've run into a wall in some parts of their career. It could be as a player, and they're being sent down, or they're traded, or they're trying to understand it. And it could be they've been fired as a coach. We've been there too. And I got fired in St. Louis, and I didn't like it, but that's the way it was. So, you have to learn how to roll with the punches. It's not a perfect world. It's not a perfect game. And there's no perfect careers out there. But so I try and be upfront with them. I try and connect them with other people that would be near them or in their situation that they could use as another resource. So we try and have a network. I think we've got a pretty good network at Michigan, and probably in college hockey, and as well as the NHL and pro hockey. So it's it's a changing world, but it's good to hear from them. Obviously, there's always a personal part, and I love that. Just like Jack does, I like to see our former players and hang out with them and talk to them and so on. They don't all go on canoe trips, but they've all gone on some kind of an event, and they appreciate what I'm doing or what I've done and what they did and what we did, together and so on. So I think there's a bond there that brings them back and keeps us. I don't have to talk to a player for 10 years, and he could call me out of the blue, and just like that, we reconnect. So it's good stuff. It's sometimes it's personal, and sometimes it's not for me to tell them what to do, but it's just what not to do, and so on. So it's good. I feel like a grandfather, which I am to them, some of them, and a father to some of them, and maybe like an older brother to some of them.
Jack?
I I've had a lot of experiences with guys calling and asking for help in different areas. I'll give it a rationale. I was offered the Bruins job. I know Harry Sinden very well. He's a great guy. I got along with him very well. I never worked for him, but I got along with him very well, and I always admired the way he ran his club. And he offered me the Bruins job one year, and I took some time to, took about 4 or 5 days to make the decision. And I came back and I told him, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not going to take the job. And he said to me, yeah, I knew you wouldn't. And he had offered me, I just signed a 10-year contract at BU, and he had offered me an 8-year contract with the Bruins. The contract was going to be 4 years as the head coach and then 4 years as assistant general manager, and would be significant amount of money as the head coach, not as much as the assistant general manager. And that could change. It could be either 2 years as the head coach and you weren't doing a good job, so you'd be 6 years as the assistant general manager, stuff like that. So it was not a worry about future as far as getting fired. But I said to him, I'm not going to take the job. He says, yeah, I knew you wouldn't. I say, why do you say that? This was the most difficult decision of my life, I think. He says, yeah, I'll tell you why. He said, I imagine when you're coaching BU, being the coach at BU, you're in your office in the summertime, and a couple of former players come by once a month to say hello, see how you're doing, tell them tell you your problems, or just want to check in. That never happens here, he says. He says, and that's one of the great things about what you're doing is, and I think to this day, the best part about coaching college hockey is the relationship you have with the players while they're there, and even more so the relationship you have with the players after they've graduated. One of the unique things with me and Fred and I was the fact that we were both there for so many years, that the players themselves have a connection. They all played for the same coach, so they can tell the same stories. They can, that makes it for more of a family type of situation. I mean, I was, 40 years the head coach at BU. As someone once said, a real dead end job. All those guys all played for the same guys, so they feel like they have the same experiences, and it's amazing when they get together. Some guys that played in the 90s are talking to guys that played in the 70s like they were on the same team. It's fabulous to see. But the best part about it is that I have a certain aspect of my life that I don't discuss much, but I've got guys that are in that aspect with me, and it's great to see them coming along in that area, and I get a lot of calls regarding that. But it's also great just to have guys, they just want to check in and say hello, and Diana showed me their 5-year-old, and tell me
That's
what
awesome.
And it's one of the great parts about the job. You're sitting in the game, you're sitting in a box watching a game, and all of a sudden a player who played 15 years ago came by to say hello and stop and chat with you for a while.
Well, Jack and Red, I just want to thank you on behalf of our audience, and I think all the coaches across college hockey. I think both of you are, really admired and respected for your careers and the work that you've done. And I think my goal personally in this conversation was, I think in a profession where there's such an emphasis, especially for young coaches, to try and climb that ladder as quick as possible and always looking ahead to the next stop. I feel that there's so much to be said for, be it at Boston University or the University of Michigan, being in one place and just really focusing on having a positive impact on the lives of not just your players, but just people, and giving them skills that are going to influence the quality of their life moving forward. And again, that could be at a midget program, that could be volunteering with the local Adam team in your community. So I think you shed a great light on that. So again, thank you so much for your time today. And it was great chatting with you. And I hope that you enjoy the coming season, and good luck to both of your respective former programs.
The Glass and Out podcast is a The Coaches Site production.